end of the last conversation, we got onto faking reality, and we were sort of discussing, you were talking about a narcissist. I was then talking about Nazi soldiers during World War II moving from point blank massacring of Jews to distancing themselves. But, we're talking about that.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to think, is there any time you can fake reality without avoiding looking at it? Can you think of an instance where reality, this is what I mean by tearing everything apart. I'm just trying to understand exactly what is meant by all these.
Like faking reality without evading it. Like you can fake it without knowing you're evading it.
No, so in this essay, she said something, I think pretty sure it was in this essay. She said something like, there are three ways, we exercise choice on a fundamental level. So one is you just default and you don't think, and you kind of mentally drift. The next one is you focus, meaning you turn on the mind, you use the spark plug of the engine, and you are taking in information. So that's two. And then the third one is evasion, which is another mental state of actively evading facts or things that come at you from reality, seeking to escape them. And so I'm wondering if faking faking reality as it's described here must always entail a mental state of evasion. Like, is it possible? To me, faking is something active. So I would think that you'd have to always, I can't think of an example of someone who faked reality and, like a narcissist. I think going back to your example, like what if someone's reached some very high level of self-confidence that has no basis, but it was reached by mistake? Yeah, this is too abstract, so I don't know if this is true.
I see what you mean now. I see what you mean. Like someone gets that false understanding without evasion. I mean, I guess it's possible. Because you could come to a false understanding of something without deliberately trying to avoid the facts, in which case it wouldn't be evasion or even faking reality. It would be maybe misunderstanding reality. You can misapprehend reality. You could say, look at how the planets orbit the Earth and misapprehend how it happens. It doesn't mean you're necessarily evading if you think, at least back then in particular, if you think that everything just goes around the Earth, even the sun going around the Earth. It's not like they've evaded to come to that conclusion, that they evaded the fact that the Earth actually goes around the sun. It's like there isn't any information they have to make that choice-driven realization. And hopefully they would have reached that conclusion by reasoning it out, or thinking about it, or the scientists were actually thinking about how the planets orbit. Of course, they were wrong, but it doesn't mean they were evading. It really depends on exactly the thing in question, but something like science, you would say being mistaken then isn't evasion. It's not like you faked reality by saying that, or Aristotle wasn't faking reality when he said like things had impetus and were almost literally carried by things through the air. That's how they were accelerated and all that, which is like a pre-concept of acceleration, things like that. But it's not that he evaded the facts of what he saw before him. It's just he was lacking other information to make it more consistent with everything else. You could misapprehend your skills and abilities without pretending that you have more than you actually have. And then you learn and you fix it. I mean, that's what would be the difference between evading and making a mistake, that you've come to realize it and then still insist on doing the thing incorrectly or insisting on doing it the way that you know better.
I agree with everything you've said. Now that I'm articulating it and we're having this conversation, yes, like faking is an active verb, and then so is evasion. It's an active process.
Yes.
And so, yeah, if you have just reached a conclusion in error, that would be, like you said, misapprehending or misperceiving reality. and it just refers to an error, basically. Um, and that'll vary from context to context, like you pointed out with the scientific examples. What my interest then is, it's so hard to one thing about reading some of Ayn Rand's essays to me, which is I really like the way she writes. I like the way she's thinking about things very clearly. But one thing I find difficult is sometimes she'll make these broad sweeping statements on people, like this is what they're feeling, this is who they are. And so
Yeah,
the reason I'm bringing this up is because I'm wondering, like, I can tell maybe when I'm faking reality, but how easy is it to validate the conclusion that someone else is? Like, for example, going back to this example of the Nazi soldiers, um, and we say, someone came up with the idea after having soldiers commit executions point blank and go crazy. Someone came up with the idea of using gas chambers. Now, um, my question is then, like, I know this is not really directly related to this, but I'm sort of going in this direction because I'm curious. Like, is there any way to think about how do you know, like, okay, this Nazi soldier, is this one faking reality, or is he just not really he hasn't, just by default, he hasn't thought it through what he's doing, and there's now a gas chamber and he's doing this thing. Like, it's do you understand that question, or do I need
yeah,
to sort of?
I would say I think she goes too far in that. I don't think she's contradicting herself. I think maybe she's not being charitable enough in interpreting them. I mean, it doesn't change what her claims are about philosophy, but I think in that context, she's misapplying it. I think she's gone too far in making those judgments, but to make it not like it's not off base entirely, I think a lot of her reasoning seems to be more about if you think this way about being like a zombie about your thinking about day-to-day life, then it will lead to something like that. Doesn't You don't have to go the reverse way saying everybody who's a Nazi soldier is therefore thinking that way. But anyone who does think that way will be like like a Nazi soldier. So sometimes she goes too much from the one direction than the other. I think it's fine to think of us say like an altruist thinks this way, therefore when you think this way, this would happen. That would be usually when she does it that way, that makes a lot more sense and easier way to see her idea in a more charitable way. I agree that she's going a bit too hard on the way she says that sometimes. And she even said that could be called psychologizing, and she herself said that's not really a good thing to do. Like, don't presume you know more about a person's psychology than they do. Don't tell them what they feel if they say it's not how they feel. I mean, we can't presume either that just by seeing somebody act in a rational way that therefore we know why they did. But it would be fair to say if somebody's picking up things by social osmosis, it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that therefore they'll react in this different way.
So my interest in this also is just understanding, uh, trying to grapple with a process of judgment that is more accurate. So, like, on the one hand, you don't want to reach conclusions without a basis, but on the other, you do want to have some way to categorize people without losing too much of the information. So I'm going back to this faking reality example because maybe you can tell when you are, but like, has there been much thought put into, yeah, that question of like evaluating people in reference to certain principles and validating that evaluation? Because there's a lot of assumptions I make, like the Nazi soldiers. Are they evading, or maybe some are, maybe others are just stupid? I don't know. Like, it's not easy for me to
It's not
uh,
easy.
prove that conclusively to myself, right? Because you can look at anyone who's doing something stupid, and you might say, "Oh, wow, this person is a terrible person." Like, I could imagine a scenario where I would have done that in the past, but then, like, you've used that phrase, charitable interpretation, like that. I think that often I can see how that applies a lot because I've been put in the position where I've done something really dumb, and I can see it's just through a really, it's not, it's, I'm just not, I haven't like thought through it like a genius. It's taken me a long time. And so when I think about that in my situation, then anyway, that whole topic of like evaluating people is interesting to me, and I'm wondering if there's more thought on that.
That one's really hard, and I never felt Rand has enough on that. I think she's generally right about it when she talks about it, but she doesn't talk about it enough in a way that I could really say a good way to judge people within her philosophy. I've learned how to judge people by learning about psychology because that's an interest of mine, and just experience with people. I get to know what sort of reasons people have for doing different things. And that would include the variety of reasons sometimes. To some extent, it's a matter of your creativity and what you could put together and assemble. But the harder thing to do is put together principles that are common among people. Like altruism can be a common thing that people have a hard time saying no. And you could say, oh, I recognize that in many people before, and I know probably why you have that problem. And you could talk to them like, well, talk to them a little bit. It doesn't take that much information, I think, to figure it out. Then to see it, ask a few questions like, oh yeah, I see your problem, or even without asking them, you could just get sent, well, there's a good chance I know what they're doing, and it resembles all this about other people. I might make a mistake, but this is information I have right now. So this is the best you can do.
Yeah, I
But,
suppose you're right. Yeah.
but you don't want to be so open-minded that you can never make up your mind how somebody's behaving and just be taken advantage of easily. It's a balance between having enough information and recognizing when you don't. And then you can make your evaluations of people. Sometimes it could be like in a matter of a discussion, you bring up facts and they refuse to even acknowledge it, then you could start to see a pattern in their behavior. That's not just something, oh, they made a mistake once, but it's a matter of their thinking. And at least for Rand, a better, more accurate way to think of people is evaluate how they think, not just how they behave. Like figure out what pushes their way of thinking, what underlies it. Like we were saying before, you could misapprehend reality or you could fake reality. Like you can't automatically know which is which unless you ask the person what they're thinking of. I mean, maybe you could say the person picked up the idea because they live in ancient Egypt and the local priest said that. Well, that's evading reality, even if they came to the same conclusion. Like they're not thinking about it reality. They're not evaluating things for themselves. They're just taking it on what somebody said. So while the scientist or a priest might not be misapprehending reality, the person who learns from them might be. So it really depends on how they're using their mind.
Yeah. It's I suppose if there was some book which provided principles and thought on methods of evaluation and judgment, that you wouldn't walk into, you know, a bookstore and find like 200 books on psychology. There would be like one book. But there's all these different theories and schools in psychology. So yeah,
Yes.
I think you're right. I I think the way for me to approach it that I can think of is one is, so in terms of like this example of the Nazi soldiers, instead of going, yes, they must be faking reality, just ask myself, like, are they? And then what do I need to figure that out if I'm interested in pursuing that question, for example? And so it's more of, is it like you observe something and then say, okay, I noticed this, but I don't know if it's true or not. What do I need to prove it? So that approach, and then also reading fiction, probably, I think is probably.
Yeah. And just to mention the Nazis more, like if you did pursue it a bit, you would find story after story of people saying like it wasn't them making the order, it's out of their control. They're not the one doing it, and or they distance themselves from it. I mean, example after example, you'll find when you study that, like that's what they do. It's almost like after seeing it enough, it's like, well, a big part of that is the fact that they've started to evade reality. I mean, you could take individual instances, but like once you do start, you'll start seeing more and more of these sort of things. I mean, that is, I mean, Rand was right to say that if you evade reality, like bad things will happen. That's pretty, even if you don't want it to, they still do. They still happen. And that's the sort of thing you could take away from what she's saying.
Yep. Makes sense. Okay, so I think we've covered that in quite a bit of detail, which is good. I then I'm still reading about rationality, and she said something like, one must never desire effects without causes and never enact a cause without assuming full responsibility for its effect. And so I'm just curious about what that looks like psychologically. So for example, never desire effects without causes. So you look at someone who's successful at something and you feel envy or you feel jealousy. So then an implementation of this virtue, which acknowledges that you must never desire effects without causes, would mean you look at that person maybe and go, wow, that's impressive. What did they do to get there? What did they study? How did they, behave? So maybe that would be it would be followed up by a conscious process of reasoning, a conscious process of reasoning, reminding you that there are causes and there are effects. And so if you feel something, you should investigate how that person got to that point. That's just an example of me trying to see what this looks like psychologically. Can you think of any other way that might play out psychologically?
I think an easier way to think of that is somebody cheating on a test, that they want to succeed at it without putting any of the effort into it. I mean, I'm not sure they don't. I mean, for the most part, that's why it would happen. Like, it's desiring the effect without any of the causes to get there.
But in that case, the cause is cheating. So you can the effect is you want to pass the test. So why not? You can cheat. Depends on the context, but yeah.
Yeah, or it's more like changing what. That's the harder way to phrase it. Now that you put it that way, like of course you're getting success on the test by cheating, but I think part of that's evaluating what the point of the task is. You're supposed to succeed by studying. That's why it's built the way it is. It's supposed to test your understanding without looking at somebody else or using somebody else's understanding. So you're seeking out the goal of that test without putting in the work that's supposed to be conceived of or that is supposed to be for. Like, of course, you could cheat to accomplish the same thing, but they're not just trying to see your ingenuity at getting a higher number. They just want to say your ability at understanding macroeconomics. Like, what would be even the point of it? Like, okay, you got ahead, you got a job maybe, but then when you're in that job, can you actually maintain that ability? Can you maintain that there? Which it can get iffy there because it's like, well, that person has a lot of money. What if you succeed by being predatory? But that could be a whole other issue. But the thing to think about of somebody as wanting the effect without the cause is somebody who cheats or who lies on their resume, who want to show something that they don't have. A really good example in my mind is Jeffrey Epstein before, like when he was younger, like in his 20s, he lied that he graduated college to work at a stock firm, I think, to make a lot of money. And he just lied about it just to get ahead, just to make some money. You can almost think of him as an example, like, well, what's the psychology of somebody who wants this effect, all this money without putting any productivity into it, or without trying to show themselves off without doing the work that's expected or desired. And you could even extrapolate, say, well, when you start thinking like that, your mind can be even further distorted or taken away from reality because you're further desiring things without any normal sense of how to get there.
Yeah, with the examples you gave, I'd say where it's confusing, and I'm not sure it necessarily relates exactly to this, is that in those examples, like with Jeffrey Epstein and the test, it's more about the specific desire that you're seeking. So, for example, if you're just seeking to pass the test, then you can cheat. If you're just seeking to get this role in a company, then you can lie. But if the effect, so but if the effect is you are seeking to test your own knowledge or it's some longer range effect, then yes, I can see how that would be an incorrect cause for seeking that effect. But then in that case, they're still thinking in terms of effects and causes. They're just not thinking correctly about the effect. Maybe they're not thinking correctly. Maybe they don't care. I don't know. But in those examples, I can see people, they are thinking in terms of cause and effect. They're just, yeah, what I'm seeing is that maybe they're just the way they visualize the effect, or they haven't thought properly about the effect. Do you know what I'm saying when I'm bringing that up?
Yeah, I do what you mean. They're still thinking in some terms of achieving something and doing something to get it. Um, yeah, that is harder because I'm almost making to a normative example where I'm not saying it's wrong to do that. It's just they're just not focusing on the right thing. And I do think it's better to phrase it as they're not focusing on the even wider effects they want, like a better life, a more good feeling life, a more desirable life. You could say if they're seeking that, then they're trying to get causes or effects without the causes. Like you want to do well in a test, and just for its own sake, not any normal way. You'll cheat to do it. What would that even? What effect would that give you also besides just doing well on the test? I mean, are you diminishing your self-esteem in the sense of are you saying that you don't think you're able to do it like everyone else, that you don't think you can do it by studying? Are you saying that you don't care about how anybody else thinks at all, that you don't care about abusing the system and abusing the people around it just to get something out of it? And we could think of it that way as, are they seeking effects without causes? Are they seeking a good life by also at the same time trying to avoid the work that goes into it?
Well, I would say that's the example. Like I get what you're saying, but it's still fundamentally different from. Do you know that the movie The Secret or the book The Secret?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so it's still fundamentally different from someone who, say, reads that book and then visualizes a gold chain around their neck and wakes up every morning visualizing a gold chain around their neck. Because that's like, there is something different about that kind of desiring of an effect, because that person's not doing anything versus the student who hires someone from Canada to write their thesis or whatever.
But I do think that is actually a better example. With The Secret, that's literally trying to accomplish something without any effort whatsoever. I mean, you could judge it on a gradient, so to speak, like in the same way that if you do an immoral act, it doesn't mean you're the most evil person that's ever existed. It's not trying to say that any immoral act automatically dooms you to failure and worthlessness. So you could think of it that way. Like cheating on a test probably might not be as bad as actually faking reality and not even paying attention to any effects or any causes. At least a cheater is looking at something about cause and effect, but on some level they are desiring effects without causes, at least insofar as any moral standard of seeking flourishing. So
Yeah,
I mean, I
just
think
not
you're
thinking about it. They're just not thinking. They're just like, my parents told me to go to university. This is stupid. I'm just passing this test. I'll do what I need to. That's cause and effect, but they're still missing. Like yeah, there's still something off there, but they're thinking in terms of cause and effect.
Yeah, I mean, at least in terms of psychology, that could be a basis for getting somebody to change their way of thinking. They say, well, you're right about it's important to think about getting what you need to meet certain goals and needs. But why have any needs? Like, what's the purpose of those needs? Is it, I mean, you can keep making a pushback because eventually you would get them to say, is it because I want to live, because my life matters? I mean, that's the sort of approach you would have to persuade people or change their mind or work through it. But you're right, there's some element of truth to it. It's just they're missing something critical.
It's by the way, with the question of moral, immoral, what I'm realizing reading this essay is that those terms are just they have such strong connotations of like evil or good, and evil is like this monster and demon, and good is this God. And but yes, I can see how in this context, in with this morality, it's not that. It's literally just, is this good for you or bad for you as a person for living a life? So it doesn't have that meaning, but it's the words still have those connotations, obviously.
Yeah, the thing about objectivism would still be that it promotes making those judgments, and if something is severe, you judge it that way. You don't want to be like, oh, lightheaded on everyone. It's like, oh, they're not that bad. I mean, you'd have to want to condemn cheating pretty harshly. I still would, but there's still not an absolute term of just one absolute immoral. Everything is equally immoral. That's all I'm trying to say. Like, if you see somebody evading and denying the truth, that could be a reason to judge them as pretty bad. And I would judge somebody pretty badly if I can recognize that they're not even acknowledging reality before them. That would be much harsher than somebody like maybe they cheated once and now they regret it. Like I could sort of see they made a moral mistake and now they would change it. I mean, that sort of thing is different.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like it sort of goes back to what you're saying, what we were discussing before in terms of evaluating people. And I can see how there's a difference between someone who does something and regrets it versus someone who doesn't regret it, which to me would be you could infer from that that they probably do it a lot if they don't feel regret when they do something and you catch them.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot would be, I mean, there is this cognitive bias to say that like when somebody does something bad, that's just a thing that happens incidentally. Or there's two different biases. One could be that when you do something bad, then that person thinks your character itself is bad, that you're just a bad person. That's why you did it. Or if you do something good, you're just a good person. That's why you did it. You want to avoid that kind of error. You still want to look at what are they doing in this situation? What you can judge that action, but then to judge them as an entire person could be a little more difficult. But it doesn't mean you have to judge that individual action any less harsh. I mean, if you're a good person, you do one thing bad doesn't make the bad thing any less bad, and nor does it mean that you're consistently bad. I mean, the thing about context is, in certain contexts, people might do bad things a lot, but then they're not in that context very much. So you can't really do it in terms of like how often they do it. Just you have to go case by case. So like the evidence that you have, not speculating what they could be doing outside of what you've seen.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely principles then if we're coming to conclusions, but no one's just obviously put together a bunch of principles. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Um, yeah, so going back to this, never desiring effects without causes, never enacting a cause without assuming full responsibility for its effect. I mean, I'm interested to explore this because I do think there are things you can look at psychologically. Like an example, never enact a cause without assuming full responsibility for its effects. That might be uh, on a behavioral level. It might be something like if you make a mistake, own it. Don't feel ashamed. Don't say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," or whatever. Apologize if you need to, but own it that you've made that mistake, and it's okay that you've made a mistake. And then it was your responsibility, so you have to deal with it. You can like, there's different. I'm trying to figure out a good way to describe it. So the behaviorally, you can approach different events in your life completely differently if you remind yourself that you take full responsibility for causes. Um, or maybe it means you apologize way less because there's obviously, I think there's a tendency for people to just apologize a ton. Um, Today, everyone's very polite, right? And I'm the same because I'm surrounded by that. But if I'm thinking more in terms of cause and taking responsibility for its effects throughout my life in little day-to-day situations, I'm behaving differently. So I'm interested to explore it from that perspective. You know what I'm saying? Because this is an abstract formulation and it makes sense, but then to take it and implement it everywhere is actually to me, seems like a big task. There are so many ways I might think about, like that example of the rich person that I gave was like one I thought of. Well, you see, not even a rich person. Let's say you see someone in a nice car and you're like, oh, I don't have anything like that. That's a really cool car. I wish I had a car like that. Implementing this principle would then be something like, instead of going through that automated process of thought about, you see someone in a nice car and feeling jealousy or whatever it is, that's just one example. It would be like, what do I need to do to become the person who can own a car like that? Or what is what is, and then ask yourself questions about what is required to make money. And so it would be that kind of, maybe it would be implementing that kind of thinking across everything in your life. And so that's why does that make sense? Why I'm trying to explore
Yeah,
it in
I
such.
think that's more what she's kind of getting at, that like if you want something, then you've got to take the responsibility to go for it. And in the same way as you take responsibility and mistakes that might happen along the way, you don't shift the blame to something else. Like if you do say sorry, say that you know you made a mistake, you don't want to do it again, and you wish it didn't happen, but it did. Like you could acknowledge a mistake is different than say like oh, I refuse to apologize because I meant to do it. Like, well, that doesn't change that you could be still sorry. Like you could accidentally like hurt somebody's feelings. Like I've done it before, and so I say sorry because I didn't. I honestly didn't want that to happen. I take responsibility. Yeah, it's my fault. I did it, and I'm sorry I did it. Like I'm not gonna avoid like, oh, I mean that person made me upset, so I yelled at you. Like it doesn't justify getting upset at this person. They did nothing. It's not their fault. It's not. I mean that's an example of taking ownership. Like even taking ownership of the good effects and the bad effects. Like if you made a mistake, yeah, I did that. Now I know I won't how to not do it again. And that's the sort of apology that would be appropriate in the same way as trying to seek effects with their causes. You're not just saying, I'm going to be better and just that's it. You're saying, I'm going to be better. Say, I'm sorry, I'm going to be better. I'll do this. Like you have an actual thought in mind of what to do, which would be the same way as like seeing somebody driving a Tesla. I was like, I want that. Thinking, what do I need to do to get that? I need to be productive in my life. I need to earn some money. I need to finish school for this one subject, or I need to uh, teach myself how to, make barbecue better, like, and sell that and make a lot of money. Like, it could be any kind of thing, just how to get there and thinking of self-responsibility and that if thinking has to be done on your part, that your rationality is seeking your flourishing, then it's only you that can really ultimately get these things. You can get help along the way, but it's your motivation, your thinking, your drive that gets you there, and it's your effects and causes. Like you cause it to happen rather than wishing it to happen.
Can you think of any examples of someone who was enacting a cause, like a life example of someone who enacted a cause without assuming full responsibility for its effect? What would that look like?
Without seeking full responsibility. Well, I mean, you could think of a politician with a government policy saying, like this economic policy, you could say like maybe like taxation could be an example sometimes, or certain regulations like um, maybe that's I don't think I should get into a political example just yet. I should think of something more individual level. Um,
I'm trying as well. It's actually hard to.
say, trying to think of examples without crime either. Trying to think of just um, effects without causes. I mean, like evading responsibility, like trying to divert it to something else, like um, maybe like succeeding in school, but part of your way of doing that is sucking up to the teachers, and anyway, you're trying to attain some merit and position within your job, but not based on any particular work you've done, but just your social favor, as opposed to any actual thing you've done. I think that might be the best example I can think of where you're just sucking up to your boss and not because you're not making any actual decisions like I'm going to work harder, I'm going to do better than my boss says, or I'll find a different job that's actually better for me. Just be like, you just want a better position and you don't want to do any actual work with it. You just want to do social manipulation, I guess. It's not attaining it through hard work.
Someone could still. So that's the thing was never enact a cause without assuming full responsibility of effect. So you can let's say your example of manipulating your way or focusing on the social aspect, and then you're still taking responsibility for that. So I feel the reason I'm digging into this, I feel like there's guaranteed tons of ways we do this in little tiny ways we don't notice day to day, and I'm trying to find them. And then once you connect that, you can, once you make that connection, that's like you've just lifted yourself up every day because you can spot those things. Because yeah, like desire without causes, that process of observing someone in the car or whatever, and then changing your thought process around that. And then the next one is this cause without assuming for like, when do I do that? It's so hard. I can't connect that to anything, day to day. And it doesn't make sense to me that I never, ever enact a cause without assuming full responsibility for its effect. So, but the example you gave, I see that as enacting a cause. And yeah, someone can assume responsibility for it if they want to. Like, yeah, I've got, by social, social prowess, navigated my way to this point, through social skills.
Yeah, it is hard to think of any example where somebody has completely avoiding all responsibility. I do think that's kind of a point Rand makes. Sometimes you can't really consistently be immoral because you wouldn't last. So you have to, on some level, be doing something right. If like even a little tiny thing right, if you're making it at all. Otherwise, you would be dead or nowhere. You have to apply your brain to some degree. You have to take responsibility to some degree. But the question would be, are you taking it to the full degree? Are you really thinking about fully the consequences of what's happening when you act in a manipulative way? Often the people that do that will often deny different ways that they've had an effect. So the better they are at it, the better they are at actually denying the consequence. But you're right, there would be probably some people that don't deny the consequence and accept the full evil that they do, and that's that.
I've got one, by the way. I just got one. Tell me if it's right. Or tell me what you think, actually. I feel like if I cracked one, which is if you let's say you go on a date with someone and you're just very kind and nice and they send you a message and then you send them a message back and you're like they ask you how you are and you like keep in touch via text or whatever, but you don't say anything else, you're just like, yeah, things are good or whatever. And then you get angry because they keep messaging you. um, that's you. If you get angry, then that's you enacting a cause without assuming full responsibility for its effect, because you weren't, let's say you like the person, but you're not that interested in keeping in touch. You're busy. You didn't the cause was you kept staying in touch, responding, as opposed to just saying, look, I'm busy at the moment. I'm working on this and this. Maybe in future we can get back in touch. And then they stop messaging you, versus you reply to them, and then you find yourself getting angry at them for messaging you continuously. That would be an example, maybe. What do you think of that as an example of
I
enacting a
think
cause without?
I think it's a pretty good example because it's a good example for this because we're not making political things and we're not introducing very things that a lot of people don't like. I mean, that's more a common experience. I mean, I think I've done that before, but I don't know if I actually got mad. Like I have learned to tell people like when I'm not interested in talking to them, like I'm good about that. I don't get upset about it. Wait for take responsibility. I tell them like, okay, I'm not that interested in talking. Like I'm polite about it, but I think that's a good way to think of it. That even in the smaller interactions in our day to day, it can have an effect on us. When it seems like you're just having a conversation and putting it off, but like you're saying, you would be evading what you're responsible for what's happening. Like you could end it anytime you want. You could take responsibility. It's like, oh, I don't want to keep talking to them, and there's no benefit to it. But anyway, yes, your example is pretty good.
And I just thought, I think I'm thinking of others now that I got that one. Another one might be like, let's say you're working and then you check Facebook or you check social media as a distraction, as a like, a way to get out of the painful effort or focus. And then you're kind of thrown off and you're like, and then at the end of the session of the hour study or whatever, you're frustrated. You're like, oh, it felt like such a waste of time or whatever. Maybe that's also an example of you're enacting a cause without assuming full responsibility for its effect, because you're like, well, I did check Facebook and I know there's a certain, or I did do this and I know there's a certain mental cost. And so you can be, I don't know, maybe that's not an example of it. I'm just trying to look, I feel like there's way more of these little things we do day to day that exactly is that formulation. What do you think of that distraction example? Because I can see how you might be angry at yourself for giving in, but then um, if you say to yourself, oh, it was a waste of time or whatever, you're like, well, assuming responsibility for the effect would be, yeah, I did pursue distraction, or maybe it would be I did not get enough sleep. It would be looking at it differently. I don't know, that's kind of vague, but I'm trying to, yeah.
Um, yeah, I would say that's the right kind of idea. I think if you've introspected on examples when that happens, you'll probably find that you have misjudging something, that you saying it's a waste of time, but you've overlooked in a way what you've done that made it a waste of time. It has nothing to do with the studying. It's just that maybe you let yourself be distracted. You were opening Facebook. Well, that can make it harder to your study and make it more likely that you waste your time. Even if at first you didn't realize it, if you reflect on it, you can see, well, a lot of the time when you don't feel good about something, it's because of something you've done. That it's rare that it's completely out of your control when something happens, especially at least for things like this where it's only about your time for your studying. It's rarely anybody else's fault but your own for what happens when you study. Unless you like, so like an emergency, somebody's having a heart attack, obviously you could say it's not your fault that you have to deal with that, but by and large, if you think about it, you'll see that any issues are self-caused a lot.
Yeah, actually, now you make me think of when Viktor Frankl talks about taking responsibility for your life, and the space between, what is it, stimulus and response, and then also, I don't know if you've read any Mark Manson, but he makes a distinction between fault and responsibility. So you always have responsibility, whether or not, on some level, whether or not it's your fault or someone else's fault, you still have responsibility. But yeah, that's super interesting. I want to dig into that more. I can see we're pretty low on time, so I'll just stop